afternoon session of the London Conscious Life Expo. And today I am very excited to say that Marilyn Devonish, who has been our amazing, warm and welcoming MC, will also be doing a 90-minute presentation now. She's going to talk about the ancient secrets of Huna and Ho'oponopono. And she is a neurosuccess coach, a keynote speaker, a workshop facilitator, and she's also the founder of Transformations and Coaching. And she does her own training and consulting. And we're very happy to have her here today. Please come.
Oh, thank you so much, Diana. Wonderful to be here. Thank you. And today is an impromptu session. So I know speaking to some of you over lunch, you're like, well, what is Huna? So I'm going to share some of those things with you. And we're also going to do an experiential session. So one of the things I will say is start thinking about what is it you'd actually like to receive from this session and what would you like to take away? And I'm going to put that into context. But I'm going to start the journey, and the journey, strangely enough, is connected to this hotel. In May 2001, I walked into the lobby of this hotel. For those of you who are on live stream or in the United States, we're at the hotel, the Hilton Hotel in Kensington, Olympia. This is where I did my NLP trainers training in May 2001. I, in my early 20s, was diagnosed with what was thought to be early onset Alzheimer's. If any of you have done trainers training, it's a big training. It's 3 weeks, culminates in a written exam, which is 8 hours. And at this point, I was just experimenting with accelerated learning and Huna and energy and all of those good things. So I didn't revise in the traditional way. I just did the energetic stuff and walked into the lobby of this hotel. Somebody looked at me and said, Marilyn, how do you do a submodalities belief change? I looked at them. They looked at me and I burst into tears and ran into the ladies' toilets. One of my colleagues who was in we have little coaching teams, lovely lady called Deborah Price, she saw me, she came in after me and said, what's happened? Are you all right? What's going on? And I said, oh my gosh, I didn't revise properly. I just trusted all of this esoteric stuff. And at that point, I'd put a goal in my timeline because I was just getting into the whole thing about using timelines and all of that good stuff. And I put a goal in my timeline that I would finish the 8-hour exam in 3 hours. Now, this seems highly unlikely when I'm in the toilets doing the Oprah ugly cry. I mean, it was just awful. It was horrible. So I remember somebody walked in and they sort of did a double take while they're washing their hands and they didn't want to say anything. But each time somebody flushed the toilet, I actually heard that £4,500, which I'd paid for the training, going down the drain. Because if I'd failed, and somebody's nodding there, if I'd failed even just one component of trainers training, the whole thing gets wiped out. I'd have to do the whole training again. So I walk into the room and I was like, okay, I've got 3 choices. I could just cry for the rest of the day and really annoy everyone else. I could beat myself up for how ridiculous I'd been for trusting in any of this stuff about energy and focus and mindset and da-da-da. Or I could do what I've been practicing at home. And one of the first things I did is a process I'll teach you today called the Huna heart breathing. So while they were handing out the papers, they take all, you leave your bags at the back. It's a closed book exam. I was just doing the heart breathing while they were handing out the papers and saying to myself, okay, did the process from the photo reading accelerated learning about activating left and right brain, getting myself into focus, much like the picture you can see there behind me. It was almost like that. And then the exam started. So did the first paper, handed it in, did the next paper, handed it in, did the next paper, handed it in, went to the bathroom at one point. One of the invigilators follows you. I don't know if you've ever had that, somebody standing outside the cubicle. So you're trying to pee quietly. So you come back out, you go back into the room. And at some point, nobody came back. So I'm looking around, put my hand up, and Deborah was, Sally was invigilating. So I said, can I have the next paper, please? She says, you're done, hun. As in, you're finished, honey. I was like, oh. And at that point, there was an episode of Mr. Bean that was going around where Mr. Bean was doing an exam and he hadn't realized that it was double-sided. The question paper was double-sided. So suddenly my heart skipped a beat. I was like, oh my gosh, what if it was double-sided? Because there were people in the room who hadn't even had their second paper yet. So I put my hand up. I said to her, can I have because you can't get all your papers back, you can get the last one. So I said, can I have my last paper back, please? So she hands me the paper. With trembling hands, I look at it and I'm like, whew, it was single-sided. So I look around. It's like, well, I've finished. I might as well go. So I walked out the hotel room, looked at the time. How much time do you think had elapsed? 3 hours on the money. I'll be honest with you, however, I then went home and did the thing that many students might do. Got into my living room and went, please God, I know I didn't revise, but if you could just help me pass this one time, and did a little prayer, and then just thought, okay, it's out of my hands now. Apparently what had happened in the background, and just to jump back a step further, when I did my practitioner exam in October 2000, my test was so bad, and it was at home, open book. It was so bad that they were like, who is this Marilyn Devonish? She's either lazy or stupid, because I hadn't seen one that bad before. This time round, in terms of marking my trainer's training test, which is humongous in comparison, and closed book exam conditions, they were saying, who is Marilyn Devonish? And did she cheat? That was a conversation they had behind the scenes. And because I'd only left the room that one time for a few minutes to go to the bathroom, they had to give me the benefit of the doubt. But they later said, because I then worked for that organization as one of their NLP trainers, they said, when we looked at your exam paper, it looked like you'd just been copying the textbook. It was almost textbook answers. And it was one of, and you know, you have those pivotal defining moments. I was like, whoa, this stuff really works. And I was thinking back to when I first did my practitioner. Now, I went into practitioner very skeptical. I was studying to be a chartered accountant. I accidentally signed up for an NLP practitioner, long story for another day. But I phoned them up and I said, this is not what I signed up for. I need a refund. They wouldn't give me a refund, but said, come to the training. If you don't get massive value by the end, I was like, oh, here we go, sales speak, blah, blah, blah. If you don't get massive value by the end, we'll give you a refund at the end of the 7 days. So now I'm hopping mad as well. You've got £2,500 of my money. You're going to take 7 days of my life. And I've got to sit this thing out and wait for 7 days to get my refund. So for the first few days, I basically sat at the back with a face like thunder, arms folded. My arm was up every 2 seconds because I'm trying to catch them out with my analytical mind. Well, how does that work? And that doesn't make sense. And da 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 da. And at one point, the trainer asked for a volunteer because he was going to demonstrate Huna, this thing that we're going to talk about today. And he said, has anyone got an issue with another person or a situation that you would like to resolve? Like, it's been a problem for a long time. My hand shot up. I was like, aha, another opportunity for me to prove that this is all nonsense. So I volunteered. And he says, great, think about the person. And he carried on teaching the segment, much like I'm doing here today, just carried on talking. About 20 or so minutes in, he looked at me and said, how are you doing? I was like, well, what do you mean, how am I doing? You haven't done anything yet. He does another segment, turns to me again, says, how are you doing? I'm like, in my head, I'm like, dude, you haven't done anything. And this goes on and on and on and on and on. At the end of the segment, which was about an hour and a half, the length of the session we have today, he then turned to me again and said, how are you doing? And I went to what I call go off on one. And I thought, actually, I feel a bit calmer about this person. But I reasoned it's because he's made me think about them for an hour and a half. So he's desensitized me a bit. Now, one of the issues with this person was that they would never call me. But if anyone in the family said, how is Marilyn? They would say, I don't know, she never calls me. And I would always think, well, you've got a phone. You've got fingers. Why don't you ever call me? So that was the whole thing. I went home that night. There was a message for them on my voicemail. Now I'm thinking, well, something must be wrong. So I phoned back. I said, hey, how are you doing? Is everything all right? They went, yeah, just wanted to see how you were. And I remember having the receiver. This was old style phone. And I went, okay. And then they said, where have you been? I was like, oh, here we go. Because I was in the middle of my ACCA exams, the Chartered Accountancy exams, I thought, I'm just going to say I've been on a course. Because if I say I've been off studying NLP, hypnosis, and timeline therapy, I'm going to get another massive lecture about when are you going to sort your life out? When are you going to stop messing about? Yeah, so I just said I've been on a course. They then said, what course? I was like, oh, here we go. I thought I'm going to give them the worst answer I can think of. Hypnotherapy, and I'm waiting. They said, oh, they were pregnant at the time. They said, oh, do you think hypnotherapy will help me with my morning sickness? I went back to class the next day. I said, she's been abducted by aliens, because that was the most logical explanation I could think of for what had happened, because I grew up with them. I've known them my whole life. They're a completely different person from that day in October 2000. The dynamic of our relationship is still exactly the same, as in it's good. I was like, oh my God. And that was the moment where I thought, he didn't do, now I know there's a bells and whistles version of Huna, and we did a little bit of that in the opening ceremony with Tracy and Anne yesterday, but there's also the silent transmission version, where when you're talking to someone, with their permission, you can start to transmit the energy, and you can start to shift and change things. And you can use what is called Ho'oponopono, the forgiveness process, to cut the energetic ties and connections, what we call the Arca connections. And that's what the trainer had done while I was sitting in the room having a bit of a moan because he wasn't doing anything. But that then sparked something in my mind, and I got curious about it. So in 2005, went over to Hawaii for the first time to study Huna. I went back to do the next level in 2009, but it is mind-blowing. And I do about 20 different modalities. So I started with the NLP, the hypnosis to timeline therapy, added things like EFT, DNA theta healing, soul plan reading, tarot, access consciousness, archetypal profiling, the photo reading, accelerated learning, lots of good stuff. And out of all of those modalities, it's a bit like having kids. You can't have favorites. However, what I will say is right up there in terms of my clients' favorites, definitely right up there is the Huna, because it's quick, it's easy, it transcends space and time. And the nice thing for those of you watching via the live stream is it also stays in the recording. And the reason I know that, I remember years ago, I got an email from someone who said, hey, Marilyn, I've just listened to your training, and it's had some really profound shifts, and I've had some really profound shifts and changes. And I was thinking, I haven't done a training. So I emailed them back, said, thank you so much for your email. Absolutely delighted that you're having shifts and changes. May I just ask, what are you listening to? It was an MP3 audio recording that I'd done 5 years prior. They were listening to it fresh and new and had exactly the same shifts and changes as the people who were on, back in those days, the live teleseminar, because I've been coaching and training online since 2005, so well before the pandemic pivot. And people often say, well, do you have to be in the room? Do you have to be in the same place? And one of my lovely clients out in Australia, her name is Pippa Neve. I mention her name because she's written a testimonial, given me permission to speak about her. She's in Australia. I was testing, when I've got a newsletter list, whenever I'm testing things out, I used to ask for guinea pigs, and that frightened people a little bit. So now I say I'm looking for test subjects. And so she was one of my test subjects, and I was just trying out a new Huna process. Because of the time difference, she normally is on stuff that I do live. She gets up at like 4:30 in the morning, bless her. But on this occasion, she said, I'll just listen to the recording. I thought, actually, that's a really good test. What's it going to be like when somebody has the recording? So a few days later, she emailed me back, listened to the recording, wrote this essay, which I've shared various times on social media. But it was only about 3 years ago, several years after that, that I was speaking, and suddenly it dawned on me. It's like, whoa, hold on a minute. Because I was reading it out to a group. We're doing the money breakthrough group, and people were asking, will it work if I can't make the live session, etc. So I'm reading Pippa's testimonial, and I suddenly realized that in what she was describing, it was the exact order and sequence in which I'd done the Huna protocol, but she had no idea, because this was a tele-seminar. We were on the phone, and back in those days, I wasn't teaching Huna, I was just doing Huna. So all Pippa would have heard is, and even someone who's a Huna master has got no idea what symbols I just did, because we all do them at different speeds. We use the breath in a different way, and we'll draw the symbols in different, different speeds. That's all she heard. But she said, well, Marilyn, when you started, and she then started talking about the red triangle. I used the symbol, which is a red triangle. She said, at one point, I felt my heart opening up. She had no idea that I'd used the symbol that opens up the heart. She talked about the fact that she felt her third eye opening. She had no idea that at that point in the recording, I'd used the symbol to open up, and they call it letting the light pour forth. When I started the recording, she said, gosh, I felt as though I'd been pushed back. there was a symbol that I used, which is a literal translation is thunder comes down and strikes the earth and makes the earth shake. And if people are sensitive to energy, they often feel it as a pushback. So as I was reading it to the group years later, I was like, oh my goodness. And that has happened time and time again. We've been in lockdown for 2 years. So this would have been, the first time I did that event would have been, I've been the MC for 4 years. Let's just say 5 years ago for the, give or take. I did this in a room of 550 people. They had no idea what I was doing. Actually, a good timestamp if anybody wants to look it up. It was the year of the Grenfell fire. And we had just found out that the survivors were in the room below us. So the organizer of the event, I was just stepping on stage. He ran up behind me and says, Marilyn, people from Grenfell are downstairs. Can you open with some sort of, I don't know, do something, healing meditation? So I stood on stage and says, look, Lynn McTaggart is going to be coming up next, and Lynn McTaggart will be here tonight at 7 p.m. So stay tuned. So I said, Lynn McTaggart will be coming up in a few moments, but before we do that, I explained the situation. I said, I'm just going to share some energy. And I did about 2 minutes of Huna in the room. For the next 3.5 days, I could not walk 2 steps without somebody coming up and going, I have no idea what you were doing, but when you started, and then people would I was in the ladies' bathroom at one point, somebody shouting over the cubicle what they'd experienced. And one of them has said, Marilyn, I don't know what you did, but a minute or so in, I felt like I was under a waterfall. They had no idea. I just called in the water energy. Somebody else had said, I don't know what happened, but I had a pain in my shoulder. I felt this heat, and then the pain just disappeared. That was the point I did the fire symbol. They had no idea what I was doing. And every one of those people got something different, because I don't drink. But one of the things I often say is that Huna is like Heineken. There was an old advert when I was growing up that said Heineken refreshes the parts that other beers cannot reach. And that's one of the things I love about the Huna energy. My job isn't to tell it to go and do this with this person in this way. I'm just kind of like a conduit for the energy. I send it off with the permission of you and your higher self. It arrives at its destination, and then it does what it needs to do every single time without fail. And there are something called the Avaiku, the Huna guides. I often bring those in as well, and I will ask the Avaiku to go over and work with someone. And the first time I did this remotely without even realizing it, this would have been probably about 15 years ago. I've also been a management consultant since 2003. I was on site at DFT, Department for Transport, and Horse Guards, just around from Horse Guards in London. Got home after a very long day of project management consultancy, get a phone call that evening. I was writing a proposal. Weirdly, I was writing a remote and flexible working proposal for another government organisation. And I get a phone call from a friend who doesn't often ring, so I answer. She's crying. She said, I'm just phoning to say goodbye. Thank you for being a great friend. I'm going to end my life tonight. I says, okay. I said, can you hold off doing that for tonight? Put it off at least until tomorrow. And is it okay if I send you some energy tonight? That's all I said. She said yes. So I finished writing this remote working proposal, probably finished about 1 o'clock in the morning, did what I needed to do to prep for the next day because I was back on site. So I'll be leaving home at 6:45. I fell asleep. Woke up bolt upright at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't do the Huna. So I'm sitting in bed thinking of my friend, and I'm like, did that for about 5 minutes, went back to sleep. Next morning came down, there's an email from her. Hey, Marilyn, so sorry about last night. Feeling really embarrassed. Had a really bad breakup a few months ago. Haven't been eating, haven't been sleeping. Just got too much. I had too much to drink last night, really embarrassed. And then she said, but this is the part where you tell me I've lost my mind. She says, suddenly around 3 o'clock this morning, I felt really peaceful. I felt really calm, and I had the best night's sleep I've had in months. And I was like, whoa! And then I go back and relay what happened at that exact time. It was like, oh, and she's still alive and well to this day. We are still friends. When we're not in lockdown, we still go out and have a good time and all the rest of it. If she's ever watching this, thank you so much for the backstage passes to Jack Savarotti. I'll remember you forever, because that was just brilliant. So we're still friends. She's still alive. She's still well. But I was like, oh my gosh, hang on a minute. So I'm here in Hertfordshire, where I live. She's in South London, where I used to live. She had no idea what I was doing and at what time, but at the moment I sent the energy, she felt it. And in the email, she described the symbols that I sent, even in her drunken suicidal stupor. And that was another of those moments that made me sit up and go, there is something going on here. So this thing called Huna, Huna, in terms of what it is, it's an ancient Hawaiian healing methodology. It's about self-empowerment. Now, one of the things that I raised an eyebrow when I first learned about Huna in the year 2000, it had been illegal to practice Huna right up until the late 1970s. I was like, oh dear, what's going on? I don't want to be doing anything illegal. The reason it was made illegal when they were colonized by the Bostonians, because they didn't understand what the Hawaiians were doing, they put it into the bracket of kind of black magic and things that one should not touch. And so they then had to start hiding the teachings. So a lot of it is hidden in the chants and in the movements. So when you watch people doing it, because they allow the locals to sing and dance, but they didn't want them practicing anything. So when I first went to study Huna, part of the classes, oh my goodness, I was seriously, the chanting and the dancing consumed more man hours and energy than actually learning about Huna. You know, the lift door would open and somebody would be in there going, and practicing, because all of that, you convey the messages in the chants. But it's said to be about 35,000 years old, because when I first started studying Huna, I was like, oh, this is like this, and this is like this, and this is like this, and this. And it was like, oh, hold on a minute, it's probably the other way around. Huna isn't like NLP, NLP is like Huna. But it was like, wow. But one of the things I loved about Huna, there's a whole class on what they call correspondences, where they'll basically say, well, in Maori dream time, you call it this, and in Huna, we call it this. And in Qigong, they call this, and in Huna, we call it this. So it wasn't an either or, it was an and. It was encompassing. So Huna works with what you call the elementals. It's very much about being connected to the earth. It also works with the symbols, and it very much works with the breath. And so it's really now started coming back. And one of the sayings that they have in Huna is those who are meant to live Huna in this lifetime will find it. And the very first time I ran a Huna weekend workshop, people sat in that room, and I went, because I go around and say, you know, why are you here? What would you like to get from today? And we do that with everyone. People are like, I've got no idea why I'm here. I just felt drawn to it. I just felt I needed to be here. And people walked into the room and said, I just feel like I've come home. And they could not explain that, because a lot of them were English, born here. No connection to any of this stuff, but there was something about it that resonated. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some of the kind of basic principles of Huna. I'll teach you a few processes, and with your permission, we're also going to do some experiential work. So when I'm going around in my workshops, I will often say to people, what would you like? What would be most beneficial to you? Do you maybe want to fire things up, for example? Do you want to calm things down? Do you want to be more open and connected? Do you want to have that sense of connecting more to yourself, maybe connecting to your higher self? And so we have like a little menu of things. And then once I'm doing the Huna symbols, I'll choose the symbols which relate to that, and I put those into the mix. So I often do, there are times, if I'm on my photo reading workshop, we do it on the Friday night, I'll just go around to each person individually and just do a couple of minutes around them, above their head, etc. Don't need to touch them. And in these sorts of formats, when I'm doing teleseminars, we do a group process. So I'll do the symbols collectively, but then everyone will get the thing that is right for them. So first question, first of all, for those of you in the room, do I have your permission to send you some Huna energy? Fabuloso. And there's a thumbs up from Diana. And for those of you who are watching virtually in your own homes, I know I can't hear you at the moment, but I would say just say yes if you can. You can say it out loud. You might just affirm yes in your head. And also, if you believe in the higher self and work with that kind of energy, you can also be asking your higher self to come in and assist with the process, because I often get calls from people saying, Marilyn, this has happened. Can you do this? Can you send energy to this person? Can you do this? Now, for the first few years, I actually used to say no, because I'm like, I don't know who that person is. I can't be interfering with them and their energy field. And then somebody had phoned and says, look, I've got a relative who's dying. Is there anything you can do? I said, I cannot get involved in the life and death of someone else. I don't know their life path. And the voice in my head said, yes, but you can send some energy to their higher self. I was like, oh, cool, do that then, let's give that a go. So that's the thing that I've been doing since then. And I remember somebody a few years ago saying, my grandfather is dying. We're just getting ready to do the last rites. I listened to your Huna webinar. I just felt the energy. She says, could you send him some Huna, please? That's all I knew. I didn't know anything else. I just knew it was somewhere in Romania, that's all. So I said, yeah, sure. So I did the Huna energy one afternoon. Next day I get a message. She's saying, Marilyn, did you do anything yesterday afternoon? I went, why? She said, suddenly my granddad sat up in bed and asked for water. And we're bringing in the priest for last rites. And she said, he's just come back to life. She said, did you? And I was like, I said, hold on a minute. I said, did you say yesterday afternoon? And at the time I was doing the Huna, he sat up in bed and asked for water and was suddenly. Now, I have no idea if that's got anything to do with what I did. Yesterday, for those who were here with the gentleman from Nottingham University, I was saying, what's the difference between coincidence and synchronicity in your mind? I don't really talk about coincidences anymore. I stopped talking about that 20 years ago. I first became enamored with Carl Jung when I was 18 years old. I'm now 53. But in the last 21 years, I talk about synchronicity, where Carl Jung said it's an acausal principle, in that there should not be any relationship or correspondence to two or more events happening at the same time. But for some reason there is. I no longer question this because it has happened more times than I can remember. I remember somebody came in, actually sat down, just do a 1 hour session. I said, what would you like to work on? She plonks herself down and says, I hate my job, I hate my life, I hate my boss. And I went, oh, not much then. Like, we've only got an hour. And I thought, what's the quickest thing I can do? Oh, I know, we'll do some Huna and maybe throw in a bit of access consciousness. So I do the session, off she goes. A couple of days later, my phone rings. She says, hi, it's da-da-da-da. Says her name. I'm like, who's that? She said, oh, okay. And I went, oh, yeah, sorry. She said, I just had to call you. And this is what clients say a lot. You're not going to believe what happened. I was like, go on then, surprise me. She says, Marilyn, I got into work and my boss asked me about my weekend. She says that never happens because her boss hates her. And she said, we genuinely had a good conversation about it. Now, what she said to me during the session, she said, I've been there for nearly 3 years. I found out the interns, who my boss likes more than me, are earning more than me. They've just come in and they're interns. She says, Marilyn, later that day, my boss called me into the office. And she went, in her mind, oh, here we go. She walks into the office. Now, keep in mind, it's not appraisal time. It's not review time. It's nothing time. She goes into the office. They said, we've been looking through the files and we've realized that you're being underpaid. So effective this month, we're giving you a pay rise. She was like, what did you? I said, I said, I don't know who your boss is. It is that miraculous in terms of the synchronicity. And one of my clients recently sent me a message. He calls Huna the $1 million process because he's gone from struggling for money. He's now multimillionaire. I always say, look, this isn't about money. I'm not going to be standing here saying to you, yeah, we'll do a bit of Huna and suddenly you'll be a multimillionaire. That's not what I'm saying. He says to me, he said, I want to send you a gift for what you've done, because he did a £25 Huna and Tarot call. I went, yeah, sure. He said, can I have your account details or PayPal? I was like, yeah, no problem. I sent him my account details. I was actually on the phone to one of the counsellors and he says, did it arrive? I went, what? He said, I've sent you a thank you for the Huna. I said, yeah, great. You know, I can count on one hand the number of times someone sent me a tip. So I flick open I've got my phone headset in this hand, so I was just adjusting it, and I flick open my iPad, and I've got fingerprint ID. Oh gosh, I'm giving away my secrets now. So I've got a fingerprint ID. I open the banking app, and there was £11,222 in there. I couldn't say anything because I'm on the phone to a counsellor. So I'm like, hurry up and talk. I want to get off the phone. So I then type with the other hand, did you check the amount? He went, yes. So I finished this call and I phoned him. I said, what did you mean to send me? He said, exactly what I sent you. I said, but that's over $11,000. He went, exactly. He said, Marilyn, as I've told you, Huna for me has been $1 million process. That's a big tip to send for a £25 session. So I always say that Huna works in really mysterious ways, and whatever you're ready for is the way that it delivers it to your neurology. So there will be people who, when I do the Huna energy transmission, they feel it. There used to be, when I was growing up, there was an advert for a company called Maxell. They sold tape. Some of you might be too young to know what a video cassette tape is, or a 90-minute cassette tape, but they sold cassette tapes, and there'll be a man, he would sit in a chair like this, in a big armchair, in the middle of an empty room, and then they'd switch on the Maxell and his hair would blow back because it was like whoosh. That's what Huna feels like for some people. They will be sitting in their own homes, listening to the recording, and they will feel it in that way. For other people, it's very subtle. They don't feel anything at all. But what they will notice is a few days, even a few hours later, things have started to shift. Now, I remember one of my clients, a lovely guy called Loy, and when I mention people's names, it's because they've given me permission to. He actually worked with another client called David, and Lack had been out of work. He's a contractor, works for himself, been out of work for 9 months, so was getting to the end of his savings. And this was pre-pandemic, it was just regular times. He's known as a white collar warrior. So he does martial arts, but he also works in the City of London. And he said, I've been out of work for 9 months. David said to give you a call and ask you to do some Huna. So we did it over the phone. And he said, I want to unblock whatever's getting in the way of work and contracts, etc., because 9 months is a long time. Running out of cash, really need some help. So we did the Huna over the phone. I just happened to be at an event in London 2 days later. He was there. So we just stood like in the corner and did a couple of minutes secret, like, and that was it. Next day, he gets a phone call from a contract that he called dead in the water. They said, Lack, can you start tomorrow? He actually said no, because he'd then taken over childcare and all the rest of it. He said, I picked the kids up from school. Can I start next week? This was years ago. When did I do the Yes Group? Oh my God, I was speaker chair probably about 7 or 8 years ago. He's been busy and when I saw him at a dinner a few years later, I said, hey, Lack, how you doing? He went, man, it's so busy. And I just laughed because we've gone from there's nothing happening to, man, I'm so busy. So it really works in fabulous, mysterious, wonderful ways. And we're going to start with one of the key processes for me, which is the Huna ha breathing. Because in Huna, pretty much everything centers on the breath. So the ha breathing, you breathe in through the nose, you breathe out through the mouth, and you make a ha sound. That's where the ha name comes from. So this is what it sounds like. That's it. Really simple. Doing 30 to 60 seconds of Huna ha breathing will allow you to center and reset. Now, before we do that, I'm going to just ask you to do a quick rating, scale of 1 to 10. 1 equals, my God, get me out of here. And 10 equals, whoa, I feel amazing. Scale of 1 to 10, where would you, and this isn't like an Oprah confessional, you don't need to tell me the answer unless you really want to, but just kind of make a mental note for yourself. Where are you at? Scale of 1 to 10. Well, 1 equals, oh man, I'm not good. And 10 equals, I'm amazing. You might even write it down, but make a mental note of where you're at. And then you can kind of think to yourself, and actually, where would I like to be? What would and it doesn't have to be 10 out of 10. Personally, I believe there's always room for improvement. So I'm not going for a 10 out of 10 always, but just think about where would you like to be and what might be useful to help you get there in terms of what would you like to shift? What would you like to change? What would you like to release? And just kind of hold that in mind. So we're just going to do about 30 seconds of the ha breathing, just to kind of center the energy and just start clearing things and calming things down, and also making that lovely higher self connection. I always say to my clients, you don't have to do the breathing at the same rate of me, because my out breaths are sometimes quite longer. You've got people go, so I just say breathe at your own rate and breathe at your own pace and do what's comfortable for you. If you haven't had any water in the last 15 to 20 minutes, I would definitely say, please have a sip of water. Keep yourself hydrated. Cheers. Cheers to you. I'm talking to those of you on the live stream as well. Fabuloso. We haven't got any candles in here, and I'm not suggesting we get any because we've already had a blackout yesterday. We don't, and I saw the fire guys in here earlier on. Apparently there was an alarm that nobody heard, but the fire brigade turned up. But I remember once I was doing something similar, and we started doing the heart breathing, and we were in a massive building for the I think it was something. It was like some sort of, oh, it was the British Dowsing Society. And I'm doing this Huna, and I'm seeing people going, oh, and I'm like, what's going on? I had no idea. But right in the back of the room, in the real far corner, there were some candles. And every time I did a Huna symbols, the candles would do something weird. Like I'd do one symbol, and the flame would be just really calm, and then it would go, and it would be lying sideways. I didn't see any of this going on, but it's really incredible about the things that happen. So we're going to start with the heart breathing. Are you all ready to rock and roll? Cool. So it's in through the nose, out through the mouth, and just make a gentle ha sound. You want it to be a nice circular, so you're not forcing anything. And when you breathe in, you can gently allow the stomach and the diaphragm just to expand, give the lungs more room. And then as you breathe out, that compresses slightly. So here we go. So 3 more hard breaths. And then you can just go back to your regular rate and pace of breathing. How many of you already feel a bit calmer? Fabulous. And it just calms the energy. So I always say, look, I think Huna and the heart breathing has saved many lives. Because in my line of work, in terms of conflict resolution, etc., I have been into organizations where I turn up to do a training or run a mediation session or a way day, and people are openly hostile. They don't like management consultants, maybe don't like a woman telling them what to do, maybe don't even want a black woman with dreadlocks telling them what to do. Whatever their thing is, I've faced it all. And sometimes people are openly hostile, really rude. And I always say, I think Huna saves lives, because I would just kind of do the, and that's the silent version, because when you're in the middle of some new office, you don't just stand there going, and of course, in COVID times, that's not going to be recommended either. You'll clear the room, but just a very silent, and I just do 2 or 3 of those, and it just brings me back to center, and I remind myself why I'm there and what I'm in that room to do. And then what I will often do is I'll set the energy of the room, and I'll put Huna symbols in the room. Now they're not, well, there is a Huna book. If I knew I was going to be doing a talk, I would have bought the book so I could show you the symbols. But there is a Huna book. But when I say put the symbols in the room, I put them in energetically. And I remember once doing this in a big room. There was 550 people there. In the morning, I was in bed. It's probably about 7:10, and I'm in bed, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to set, now everyone's done the Huna, I've got permission, I'm going to put the symbols in the room and set the room up the way I like it, because I'm the MC, but it's not my event. Now, when it's my event, because people know what they're coming to, and they'll be angry if I didn't do Huna. They'll be like, oi, where do you think you're going? Get back here. So I set the Huna. So I thought, right, now I've worked with everyone, I'm going to set the energy in the room. So I'm in the hotel upstairs, energetically in the room, I'm placing the symbols. I go down to breakfast, see a guy, and he says, I need to talk to you. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll be in the room, you know, to find me. He comes in, he says, were you in the room this morning doing Huna? I says, what do you mean? He said, I just had this vision of you about just after 7 a.m. and I could see you in the room doing the Huna symbols. And I went, are you kidding me? He saw me in the room doing the Huna symbols, but neither of us were in the room. It was all energetic. But one of the things that will happen, and I did this as it wasn't, it was a so-called accidental experiment. I got to the hotel. It was the dead of winter because I run an event the first weekend of December every year outside of COVID. I run my Mind, Body, Spirit Energy Fest, or MBS Energy Fest. Fun, you know, small group, 20 or 30 people. And we got to the hotel. Nobody had remembered to put the heating on in our room. Freezing. And they can only find 2 or 3 little heaters. So I'm trying to run this room. Delegates are sitting with hats on. And I thought, I can't be having this. So I said, I'm really sorry. Have you got a spare room, one that's actually had the heating on all night? So we had to shift rooms. You will know, Diana, how disruptive that is. The training has started and you've now got to pack everything down and set up. So I didn't set the room up. Everybody came in, sat down. I'm starting to run the session. I look at my co-trainer, a lovely lady called Gina, and I pointed to her and I said, which meant up, out. So we went outside and I said, look, I don't want to disrupt your flow in the way that you work, but I said, this isn't working for me. So what I think I'm going to do is have everyone stand in the corridor for 5 minutes. And I'm going to set the energy of the room. You're going to hold the space. I'm going to let them back in. So I said to everyone, look, this isn't right. I'm going to set the energy, go and stand in the corridor. So I sent them all out in the corridor for 5 minutes and I put Huna symbols over the door and I watched people come back in and they were like, and then they sat down. It was a different room. And even people who don't know anything about energy, I said, how are you all feeling now? They went, oh, I don't know what you've done, but it just feels different. I was like, oh my goodness, they're tangible. And that just showed, even though I know intellectually that it makes a difference, to actually see it in action and have people feedback and tell you the difference it's making, it's like, this is off the charts. So if you're up for it, we're going to start with the first of the symbols. And there are symbols that relate to earth and grounding. There are symbols that relate to water. There are symbols that relate to fire energy. There are symbols that relate to the air. And there are also symbols that relate to what the Hawaiians call the io, the space within the space, because that's the space of transformation. So in terms of requests, does anyone have any requests in terms of, you might want to, fire things up, calm things down, shape things up, clear energy, shift anything? Anyone want to shout out if you've got any requests? I'll have a little sip of water while we have a think about it.
Just melt the barriers to the next level of self-actualizing.
Oh, I love that.
Just being able to self-actualize on a whole other level. All the things I still want to do, just remove those barriers and open those doors.
Wonderful. I love that. And one of the things when you're describing it, the first thing that comes to mind, there's a process in Huna called Ho'oponopono, or the forgiveness process. And there's what I call the social media version, which is the I'm sorry, I love you, please forgive me, thank you. And then there's a version that got hair. Sorry, you feel it breaking my lip. And then there's a version, hair. Is it sticking up?
It was.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a version that I learned when I was out in Hawaii. And the version out in Hawaii actually involves a stage. It involves the Avaiku, which is the guides. It involves working with the Arca connections. It involves calling in the ancestors and all of that sort of stuff. So there's the social media version, and then there's a bigger version. And when we're doing the Ho'oponopono, we're actually cutting what you call because the Hawaiians believe that we have what you call an Arca connection. I think of it almost like tentacles coming out of the solar plexus, and that we have an energetic connection to everything and every one that we ever come into contact with. So you've all now got an arc of connection to the table that you're sitting on, the bottles of water, the chair, each other, because you've now crossed paths. So Ho'oponopono means to make right. It's about cleaning up the energy. So the kahunas do this on a regular basis. It's a regular spiritual practice for them. Clean up the old energetic connections, cut the old energetic connections. And often when I say cut, we're going to cut the connections with your, I don't know, husband, wife, son, brother, sister, daughter, whatever. People's faces like, oh. And so when I say cut the connections, it doesn't mean you're cutting people off. It does not mean you're cutting people out of your life. What it means is it's spring cleaning. Cut the old energetic connections, clean them up such that when those connections are remade, it's from a better, healthier, more ecological place and space. So when you're talking about all of that stuff and those things, the cutting the energetic connections is a really brilliant one for that. So what we're going to do, we'll do a simpler version of that rather than getting all the stage and all the rest of it, but we're going to have the blades of white light come in and cut those energetic connections. So fabulous. Any other requests while we're about it?
One is for my parents who've been going through this legal financial situation, and it's been a decade, and it's been very draining. So that's something which I would just like to finally come to an end for them. And then in a small way, I'm going through a very stressful work situation at the moment, which is nothing compared to them, but that would be
wonderful. And when people say for someone else, one of the things I always explain is I will not be working with your parents because they're not here, they haven't asked me to. What I will do is work with the representation that you hold inside of you of your parents. Does that make sense? Fabulous. And the same with horrible bosses, etc., because there's been a whole movie about that. But the same with horrible bosses. I don't know who people's bosses are, but I say, let's work with the representation that you hold. Because people say, what did you do to my boss? What did you do to my neighbor? I'm like, nothing. I don't know who they are, but we hold that representation.
They weren't able to. Is this
now,
mic
what color
live?
is your mic? Are they color coded? Is it yellow?
It's yellow.
Yeah.
So actually, we weren't able to hear that question. So would you mind saying your question again?
Sure. So I sort of cheated because it was 2 in 1. One was to do with my parents who've been experiencing legal financial situation for over a decade now. So the first one was just hopefully that will come to an end. And then the second was just a stressful work situation that I've been experiencing, and I would just love for that to be ameliorated and a bit more peaceful at work.
I cannot remember the last time I've heard the word ameliorated. I have to congratulate you.
That's my word for the day.
I love it. I love it. Wonderful.
Do you have a question? Okay.
Fab.
Yeah, go on.
You will?
It's like, oh, go on then.
Yeah, I am currently learning how to speak light language, and I have some bits that are coming through already, but anything that'll help me go up even more and connect with that even more.
Okay, so I'm thinking chakra, third eye, opening up high self. Cool, noted. Thank you very much. Any more for any more before we get started?
Well, I actually have about 10, but I'm just going to give you probably 2. I'd like to have a stronger connection with my higher self. And I feel very fragmented since COVID. Sort of I'm picking up lots of trauma. And so just, general healing, really, just to kind of propel myself forward in the right direction.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I have one from California, from Christine, clearing blocks.
Wonderful, fabulous. Yeah, actually, for the live streamers, don't be shy. This is your moment. I'll give you another minute or so. So if there's anything you want to send to the lovely time, then please feel free. Wonderful. Alrighty, so now the way it works is what I really love about Huna. You don't have to do anything. You can just sit, chill, relax, eyes open, eyes closed, really doesn't matter. And you don't have to even know what's going on because people are just listening to the sounds. And as I said, there's a bells and whistles version and there's a silent version. Trust me when I tell you, if I did the silent version, it'll be a little bit dull because we'll just be here for about 10 minutes going. So I always do the bells and whistles version when we're in kind of forums like this. Actually, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my rings off just in case, because I do wave my hands about a bit. They're quite secure, but just I wouldn't want, they're like missiles, these rings. They're quite big today, so I wouldn't want them inadvertently flying off anywhere. So let's put those there. And it gets quite hot. Should have bought me fan, really. Right, so yes, of course I can. Right, so, sorry, I hear voices. So one of the things also, my intention whenever I do this work is that you will get the shifts and changes in a way that is right, healthy, and ecological for you and for your greatest and highest good. Now, for some people, you'll be the thunder and lightning people where things will just slam in. And for other people, it's going to be like the ripple effect where it's slow, it's gentle, and you don't necessarily notice anything. Because, you know, when we speak about change and transformation, natural tendency for the majority of humans is to want it quick and fast and now. And that's not necessarily the way that your neurology wants to operate. So I always ask that anything that we're doing is ecological and that you are in a better place and state than when we started. And we're also asking your higher self to come in on that as well to assist us with that process. Anything else? No, I think we're good. Alrighty, so here we go with the Huna. And you don't have to, people often try and make, it's like you don't have to try and make anything happen. Your job is just to sit back and receive. So, you should have told me that just now when I said anything else. Right, final thing before we really get started, we're just building up the drama here, is if you work with the higher self, you can also invite your higher self in to assist you and assist us with this process. But aside from that, there's nothing else that you need to do. So here we go. Okay, and then you can take a deep breath in and exhale. And if you've had your eyes closed, you can now open your eyes, and you might also want to have another sip of water. Right, so anything you noticed, any thoughts, any observations, anything you wanted to share, or anything you wanted to ask before we continue on?
Yeah, so my crown chakra was opening up, and I was definitely coming out of my body a little bit.
Are you going to have to say that again?
Oh, right.
Yellow mic, please.
Thank you.
Hello. Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, I was saying usually when I'm getting down, well, it was two things actually. I'm still trying to come back in my body. But I was coming out of my body a little bit. My crown chakra was going quite mad. I'm still coming out of my body actually. And when I'm getting downloads, I get the crazy. It's not. I get a different ringing in the ears for depending on what. Guys, sorry, I'm still slightly out of my body right now. I'll come back in as time goes on. But I get different ringing in the ears for different things. But this was right, like a download coming right down in. So that was I was getting a download as it was happening, and it was very, very strong. So I was getting the ringing, massive ringing in my head, and I was coming out of my body. So I'm still somewhere else, but it was definitely the download was there, it was happening.
Wonderful. Delighted to hear that. Congratulations. Anyone else? Anything you want to share? Anything you want to say?
I'm actually not quite sure what I was feeling, but it was a very intense, strong, as if I was being pushed back, almost horizontal. That's just the only way that I can describe it.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's the Mac. I call that the Maxwell moment, where you're in the chair. It's like, okay, fabuloso. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Diane.
I just wanted to ask, because when you said that we can, if we work with our higher selves, we can bring it in to connect with us and help others. So how do you do that? Do you just say higher self connect, or?
Personally, for me, because I'm talking to my higher self almost through my unconscious mind. So this is I'm just basically saying, dear unconscious mind, please ask the higher self to come in and assist with this process. Very straightforward. I'm sure, and I know, having been out to Hawaii and studied the various things, you can do some lovely rituals around it. So, for example, in the Huna tradition, you would use the heart breathing. You do a much longer process for that. You bring in what we call the Huna guys as well, the Abaiku, and you're sending the breath up in various kind of modes to the higher self, and then it's almost like it showers back down on itself. But on a practical day-to-day basis, I'm just saying, dear unconscious mind, please ask the higher self to come in and assist with that process. I'm pretty straightforward. Anything else?
Well, I was feeling, well, I felt like little jolts going through my body, you know, like the energy was moving through. And then all of a sudden, I just sort of felt like all these, I saw all these different faces, you know, people that I, you know, who've been in my life, or even like, not that I saw ancestors, but just like there was a whole like sort of lineage came through, just, and it felt like that energy was being cleared from that.
Oh, that is absolutely wonderful. And what you, in terms of what you were asking for, that's exactly what would happen during the Ho'oponopono process. We invite in all of those that you've been connected to. Now, we often start with the person who consciously they want to work with or on, etc. But I was saying invite in anyone and everyone else who has a connection, that it will be good to clean up connection. And there'll be times people actually see, they'll go, oh my gosh, what's great grandmother so-and-so doing there? So they'll actually see people and things. Other times they're just aware of the collective that is there, and then it is cleaning up the energy. So in terms of the process that you asked for, the way that it plays out when you get them all out on the metaphorical stage, it's exactly as you're describing. Well done.
Well,
I love that.
thank you.
So with regards to that, and we'll do a kind of a closing process as well, just to bring you back into alignment and back into the now. One of the things that Huna is really, really fantastic for, it's about self-empowerment, about getting greater connection to yourself, getting greater connection to the earth, reconnecting with the elements. So one of the things I say to people to do is your version of whatever it is grounding. You might live in a city, but there's probably still some green space near you or some earth. So every once in a while, just doing something to connect with that. I'm a real fan. There's something called the Ahi ritual in Huna. I'm a massive fan when there's something in my head and I'm like, oh, geez, I need to clear this. One of the things I do is get a blank sheet of paper and I just write down all of the things that I want to clear. Just, it's like a data download. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. I'll then maybe leave it for a bit, come back to it a little bit of time later and say, is there anything else at this point in time it will be useful and beneficial for me to clear? That gets added to the piece of paper. And I don't write it in nice linear fashion. It's all over the place. So I'm writing on top of everything. It's just a mess, because that's sometimes how it feels inside of the head, inside of the body. Once I'm complete with that, I take that piece of paper and I burn it. Now I've got a cauldron that sits in my kitchen. A friend of mine, when we do our group workshops, everybody writes it down. She takes it back in a rubbish bag and she burns it in her barbecue in her garden, and normally films it so we can all see it going up in flames. Outside of that, if you've ever purchased, you don't have to admit to it, but if you've ever purchased, let's say, roasted vegetables from Marks and Spencer's, they often come in a foil tray that you can put straight in the oven. I say keep the tray, wash it out and keep that. Put that tray in the sink. Set fire to your piece of paper, put it in the tray. The reason I say put it in the sink, if the fire, because sometimes those flames just go whoosh when you're letting go of things. If the fire gets out of hand, turn on the tap so that you're not creating a health hazard. But that is the way that I would do it. And when we're out in Hawaii, we did the whole ritual, and then you go to, we were by the ocean, but you go to the nearest water source and you let it go into the water. Me being Miss Smart Alec is like, dude, I live in the center of town. I'm not by the ocean. I wasn't even aware that I had a lake or a river or anything. Now I know better. I've lived in the area longer. But at that point, I'm like, I live in a very built up area in the middle of a city. What shall I do? Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to what they suggested? How you get rid of the ashes? They said, flush it down the toilet. I laughed because I thought he was pulling my leg. He was actually being serious. He says, no, 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 that's going to connect back to the source of the water. So when I've put it into my cauldron, the cauldron has a big lid. It's a great big cast iron thing on little legs. If you've ever watched, let's say, Charmed, you don't have to admit to that either, but it is one of my favourite programmes, well, it used to be. You can put the lid on there if the fires get out of hand. So I use the cauldron, and I take the cauldron, open both the seat and the lid, and I tip it in there. And as I'm tipping it in, I'm just kind of saying, right, thank you for the learnings. I release you and I let you go. Put the cauldron down, flush it. That's one of the rare occasions I do actually watch it flushing away. And then I close the lid and I'm gone and I'm done. So one of the things I'm going to invite you to do, because I know there are pads on each of these tables, grab one of those Hilton Hotel pads. A little bit of a plug there for the Hilton Hotel. So grab one of those Hilton pads and just write down anything you would love to release, anything that comes to mind. And it could be on the subject of money. So in terms of what you were sharing with your parents, the legal thing, the money, it could be you're having a difficult, stressful situation. You might give that situation a name. It could be that you're challenged with focus and concentration. Just start writing and do some free noting. And if you hit a blockage, you just say to yourself, what else, or is there anything else it will be useful for me to release? And just keep writing, and nobody's going to see what you've written. This is going to be for you then to, with this, I'll say rip it out of the pad so you don't inadvertently leave it, and then somebody sits in that seat later and looks at your writing. Keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. Then you're going to take this away and do your version of burning it and releasing it. So you don't have to worry about having to, this is not Oprah, where I'm going to say, so everybody come up on stage one by one and tell me what you wrote. It's not that, much as I love that approach as well. And for those of you watching on camera, when I'm looking at my phone, I am not on social media, much as I spend a lot of time there. I'm actually checking the stopwatch because people must be watching. What's she on the phone? What's she doing now? I'm just checking the time to make sure we're good. And there's a process that I use called access consciousness as well. And one of the things I will add into the mix, I might say something along the lines when I'm doing a clearing for someone, anything and everything known or unknown, seen or unseen. So there may be something, you might be going, look, there is something I want to release. I have no idea what that is. Just write that down, the unknown, the unseen, because we're not working with our linear conscious intelligence only. We're working with, let's just call it in terms of what we're talking about here today, let's say the higher self, who has a much better overview than we might have with our analytical mind. So if there's something you cannot put into words, you can just write whatever that thing is and just put the unknown or the unseen, whatever the blockage is. You might even just call it the blockage. So another minute or so, and just checking in with yourself, is there anything else that would be useful to release? Anything else you want to write down on that piece of paper? And then you can either fold the piece of paper or just screw it up, whatever you want to do, however you want to do it. And if you're like, look, I'm not burning anything, you can actually just rip it up as well, because there's a nice cathartic feeling to that. So you can do with that paper what you choose. But if you're going to be doing the burning ritual later, it goes up in smoke. If you have a lake or a river or something near you, let the ashes cool. I used to say put it into like a little carrier. Nowadays, I would say I put it into a little plastic tub, because what you can do when you've thrown the ashes away, if you can get close enough safely, you can rinse it out as well and do a final little ta-da, and then do a bit of recycling. But however you want to do it, fold that piece of paper up, screw that piece of paper up, or rip that piece of paper up, and you can do a little ritual later on to release that. Okay, so And it's just a nice thing to do every once in a while, because what it also does, it kind of gets it out of your head and out of your energy field and out of your neurology and puts it out into the ether. So about the Huna symbols that we were using, with regards to the symbols, I will, based on what people say, will then determine the symbols that I choose and the symbols that I use. And the way that it works, you draw the symbols in the air on the breath, and then you deliver them to the recipient on the breath. So you don't need to know what the symbols are for them to work. And I always just say to people, notice what you notice. Notice how things shift. Notice how things change. Notice also how you feel within yourself. And every single time something happens which is closer to where you want to be, no matter how seemingly small or insignificant, take a moment to acknowledge the progress. Because one of the things I've also noticed about humans, they'll get a goal, an outcome, an objective, a requirement. And if it doesn't come in glorious technicolor with bells and whistles, all the rest of it on it, they'll go, well, that didn't work. But actually, there have been little green shoots along the way. But because it's not the big final thing, people normally bat that off. However, the way that you start momentum is a little thing here, and 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 gradually you start building up the snowball effect. So I always say, every single time something happens, let's just say the person you have a conflict with is a little bit nicer, or you're expecting it to be really difficult, and actually it was okay, no big deal. You thought it was going to be really challenging, well, it's pretty easy. Don't ignore those things. Take a moment. Now, for me, I say, thank you very much. I'm always talking to the universe, but I'm going to acknowledge those things. And then I'm saying, more of the same, please. More of the same, please. Thank you. More of the same. And that's how you start that pace of momentum. So definitely start looking out. Now, in terms of how you feel in your physical body, I would always say to calm down, do the ha breathing, and then you compare that with something that the Hawaiians call hakalau. Hakalau means to expand outwards and inwards, and also be aware of the periphery. So one of the things, so the breathing, as I said, is one of the foundation pieces. You can then add to this thing called hakalau. So hakalau means peripheral vision. So you can either be in tunnel vision. So if I'm in tunnel vision, I now have no idea what's going on the table over there. I literally have to turn, but now I have no idea what's going on over there. Whereas if I'm in hakalau or expanded awareness, my vision does this. So one of the things when you do this, it also kicks into what you call the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the body's natural relaxation response. So when you pair that with the ha breath and bring in hakalau, seriously, and what there was a lovely lady when I was talking about years later, she'd come to my photo reading workshop. Again, I'm going to say her name because she's done a video testimony, etc. Lovely lady called Neelam. I was talking to someone about what happened in this hotel, where I'd walked in, burst into tears because I hadn't revised in the traditional way. I'd just been photo reading at 25,000 words per minute and photo reading whole books in 5 minutes, doing the odd mind map, and that was my revision, done. Whereas everyone else was reading word for days and weeks. And so I was talking about what happened, and she said, Neelam was there. She says, I was there that day, and I won't say the word, but it begins with a P, but you really, let's say, miffed me off. Let's leave it at that. And I said, why? Because she'd never told me this before. She said, you really messed up my exam. You nearly, I think, made me fail. I went, what did I do? She says, Marilyn. She said, throughout the course of the day, several people left early. But she said, pretty much all of them left in a state of stress because they just couldn't do anymore. I was the very first person to leave after 3 hours. She said, number one, she saw me getting up and she said, you just look so calm. And then she's thinking, where is Marilyn going? Because she thought, oh, maybe she's going, but then she saw me collecting my bag and all the rest of it. And she says, you literally glided out of the room. And so for the rest of the exam, I messaged, she's now, where did Marilyn go? Why has she gone so early? Why does she look so calm? How did she finish it? And this is all going on in their head. And she said it really messed with her performance, potentially messed with her performance on the day, but she'd never said anything to me about it. So I was then explaining how I did it and the process that I used. But it was that whole thing that when you are in that place where you're using the hard breathing, get yourself into Hakalau, as people watch you. And I remember once I went on site, there's something called Prince 2 project management here. So I'm Prince 2 project manager. I'd gone on site to manage a big project we were implementing. This was back in 2003. No, this one was in 2005. We were implementing a great big remote and smart and flexible working strategy, because I know it sounds weird, but I have been a remote working implementation consultant since 2003, which means going into organizations to write and design and implement remote working policy and strategy, which is now what the whole world is doing. So we're working on this big project, massive government department. We probably had, I don't know, 5,000 members of staff. We were building some software to track time, etc., building it from scratch, writing code, all of that sort of thing. So I'm on site, and I get called in by one of the managers, and he basically said to me, I don't think you understand the magnitude and the gravity of what's going on here. I says, what do you mean? Now, he was used to what I call headless chicken managers. People flapping about all over the place, it's all frenetic. And there was me gliding about the office, sort of almost like not a care in the world. I said, what's the problem? He said, well, I don't. And I said, what are you concerned about? And he said, well, department, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, let me tell you what's going on in department, blah, blah, blah. And I just started reeling off all of the issues, all of the things, who's doing what. And after about 5 minutes, he put his hand up and he says, I can see you have a complete grasp of the situation. Thank you, I shall leave you to get on with what you're doing. And that's happened to me several times. And I know why that is. It's because I'm always pretty calm. Even when I'm in situations where the police have said, I do mediation work, and the police have said, we're not coming, good luck. And no, this is honest truth. And I recommend that you get some bulletproof and stab-proof vests. That was how they left the meeting. My boss at the time, that's the only time he's ever said, I don't want you to go. I said, it'd be cool. I had 3.5 hours to bring together a group of people who had been warring for years. There was an estate in London, what you'd call the projects out in the United States. There's some gangs operating. One of the gang members had stolen a moped, was killed, and apparently, whilst at the scene, the police were standing over his body, and some of the residents and said some derogatory things, which were heard by the other gang members, etc. So this ignited the whole situation again. And they were in a crisis meeting, and I'm a corporate trainer. I do a lot of things, but I'm a corporate trainer, and I do leadership development training. And someone on the panel has said, there's a woman called Marilyn Devonish. She came in to deliver some leadership training. I actually think you should call her. I think she'd be great for this. So I get this random call saying, this is what's going on. Can you help us? I then went in and they said, they're in a church hall, local authority. Of course, they've got no budget. So they're in a church hall. We've got it for 3.5 hours. We want to bring everyone together for the first time ever. That was the brief. I'm like, okay, cool. So the police say they're not coming. The gang members say they're not coming. I'm saying, oh, yes, you are. The police say, okay, well, if we come, we're staying outside. The gang say, we're, and I'm like, no, you're not. So I'm at home now. I kind of wrote a little agenda. You've got to make it look official when you're on these sorts of jobs. Something I could write on the flip chart, throw on a slide, but we didn't have a projector, so I just used a flip chart. But basically, I envisioned, and we talked about the breaking bread thing here earlier in the conference. I envisioned that by the end of that 3.5 hours, this is what I said to myself, we will be breaking bread. And what that meant is eating together, conversing, and we're like a little mini family. This seemed highly unlikely when even the police don't want to come, and the gang members don't want to come, and the residents are afraid of the gangs. So now I've got a brief. So I'm saying, right, you're all coming, you'll all be there. Then what I said to everyone, look, we don't have a budget, but if you have a favorite dish from your area, your region, please bring it with you. You might want to make something. And if you like me, I don't cook. I love eating, but I'm not interested in cooking. I would go to Marks and Spencer's and bring something. Just bring something. So I devised this thing where I'm going to make them all work together in groups. So I'm going to mix them all up and we're going to do all this stuff. So we get to the end of the day. And I wish I'd had a camera. This was early days. We didn't have smartphones, all that sort of stuff. I'm walking around and there's a little old lady who's like 4 foot nothing, and one of the gang members who's 6 foot something. So they're both eating. She's looking up at him, he's looking down at her, and she says, "Oh, you're such a lovely young man. I knew your mother when she was growing up." And I'm like, we've done it. We have done it. A year and a half later, I was at a different event for another local authority, and one of the people was there. And they said, "We didn't tell you, Marilyn, but that estate went on to be transformed. The gang members who were young and fit did all the climbing. So they put up their, hanging baskets, repairing everything that needed fixing. The residents, many of whom were of now what would be the older generation, coming into my generation, a lot of them had green fingers, skills that they weren't using. They worked together as a result of that 3.5-hour meeting, and years later was still working together, transforming the estate." Somebody said, "What did you do?" And I said, "I've got a secret weapon." And he said, "What is it?" I said, "Hire me again, I'll tell you." But the secret weapon was Huna. Because I sat at home. I didn't know what the venue was. I didn't know what it looked like, but I sat at home and I said, right, my outcome, I want them breaking bread, working together as a family. And then what I did is like, okay, Avaiku, I want you to go ahead, set up the energy of the room. I then, in my mind, even though I had no idea what the venue looked like, or I just basically had the address, didn't know where it was at the time, and I put the symbols in the room, and I set the Huna energy, and I sent it out ahead of me. And then I asked the energy, as we go in, because I said to everyone, do I have your permission that we will work here together today? They all said yes. I'm like, all right. It's a bit like, when you say Avengers Assemble? It was a bit like that. It's like, okay, energy, let's do this thing. So I wasn't alone in that room on that stage. I brought those energetic forces with me. And I don't believe that Marilyn Devonish was the one who did all the work on that day. I had energetic help to achieve that. So, but seriously, there are things that have happened with this energy, the likes of which you would not believe. And it's people almost like, well, what happened? How did that happen? But it's so easy, it's so seamless. And one of the things I always say about the ancient stuff, people call like alternative medicine. I'm like, quite frankly, I don't think that's the right term. I think it's the original medicine. I think it's the original practices. I think it's the original healings. And I often sometimes think the ancestors are looking down on us and giggling, going, oh, look, they just rediscovered fennel. Oh, look. Oh, I really think that's what's happening. Because my goodness, we have power the likes of which you wouldn't believe. And people have said, well, how do you learn Huna? How do you do this? And I'm saying, look, actually, and Lynn's going to talk about it tonight, the power of intention. There'll be when I'm sending the Huna energy, I am using my intention. We all have that. If you've ever been on social media, somebody says, can you send good vibes too? That's essentially what they're doing. So I would say, fancy tools aside, bring yourself back to yourself, your heart, the energy of the gut and the solar plexus, which many are now starting to wake up and call the second brain for reasons we won't go into today, but it's a powerhouse. Just sending that energy, sending that intention, holding good intention for someone. It's like magic. It really is like magic. And that's why I'm always saying also, I believe we live in a magical universe where things are going on around us. It's like, wow, it's absolutely fantastic and amazing. So I just want to say thank you for your time, for your energy, for your attention. We're going to do one quick round of Huna. We're going to close with a ha breath. And it's then about grounding yourself back into the place and the space that you're in. So take a deep breath in. And exhale. And you might just imagine there's some wonderful universal energy coming in the top of the head and cascading all the way down, right through the center of the body, the core of the system, and also down the shoulders, the arms, right down through the hips, the thighs, the knees, the calves, all the way down to the bottom of your feet, so that you're bringing yourself back into alignment and bringing yourself back into the place and the space that you're now in, both grounded and connected to the earth, and also, if you choose to, being connected to that divine universal energy, so that there's this wonderful alchemic mix. And then take another deep breath in. And exhale. And bringing yourself back into center and back into the now. Well, thank you all. It was fun having a little play. Cool. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. That was really inspiring. And we've got all these incredible tools now to take out and utilize. And who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks or days or months. I'm sure that those symbols are extremely powerful. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you. And we now have a break. So our next speaker we know is here. We've already seen him. So we come back at 3 p.m. UK BST. So that's 35 minutes from now. So enjoy your break. We will see you then. And I have to ask you, where's this crystal from? It's gorgeous. Did you bring it with you?
Yes, I think.